One of our favorites who covers sports and brings unique insight every single time he hits the keyboard is Yahoo Sports columnist Dan Wetzel, back here on the Rich Eisen Show on the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line. How you been, Dan?
I'm good, Rich. How you been?
I'm doing fine. Do we call college football professional sports yet? What do you think? I mean, Kirby Smart's paid like a professional football coach. We've seen more and more name, image, and likeness deals of players where they're making more money than rookies at their position in the NFL. Have we reached the point yet, Dan? What do you think?
I don't know why we wouldn't. At this point, there's virtually no decision made that has anything to do with amateurism, other than to keep claiming it so you don't have to pay taxes. It's a pretty good little bit, but. Yeah, I mean, the decisions consistently get more and more bottom line, particularly in the way the television networks really run the sport now. It's a desire for Fox to Fox is literally sitting in on the Big Ten's TV negotiations with other broadcast partners, and the decisions now aren't just in the same way SEC and the ESPN. It's not just hey, we add USC and UCLA and our league gets stronger, we decimate a competitor in the Pac-12, and via supply and demand, we're even more valuable because we've cut supply and increased the demand in our product. So it's consistently more cutthroat business-wise. It's how are we going to design this playoff to maximize the profits of us, maybe not improve the entire sport and all that. There's just very little going on at the upper levels, let alone the players making a little bit of cash that suggests it's anything but the NFL.
So what's the next step? I'll ask you the same question I asked Pete Thamel, our colleague at ESPN yesterday. Is the USC, UCLA joining the Big Ten? Even though the governor of this great state of California seems to think UCLA shouldn't go, it seems, or needs some reasoning as to why the UC system needs to be subsumed by Big Ten football. Is that the last step? Is that the last big kaboom this year, and we're going to just play football and see how it all plays out, or there's still more to come right now?
Well, there's two big things that have to come up. One would be if Notre Dame decided to join a conference, and that isn't going to happen anytime soon. Notre Dame wants to see what the playoff will look like, and as long as there is access in a large number of at-large spots for Notre Dame to make the college football playoff, then they should be fine. They also want to see what they can get on the market with the renewal of their NBC deal. As long as that number isn't incredibly behind, and it shouldn't, the Big Ten and SEC. It doesn't have to be the same, but if it's in the $60 or $70 million a year range, while Big Ten schools are making $100, maybe that's enough for them. So would Notre Dame jump? Notre Dame's not going to make that decision right now. They don't have to. They're always going to be desired. They're the belle of the ball. The only other thing would be what happens with the Big 12 and the Pac-10. Right now, the Pac-10 and Pac-12, now Pac-10, but whatever, is saying we're going to stick together. We're going to go out into market and negotiate our deal, and we're not going to merge with the Big 12. As long as that's the same, then this will go on fairly similarly. But if the Big 12 can convince, particularly the Arizona State, Utah, Colorado, any of those schools, hey, you're better off with us, we're more stable, then the Pac-12 could fall apart. But if the remaining 10 Pac-12 schools want to stick together, then I think we'll hit a little bit of a calm for the time being. But those are really the only two things that are going to happen. The ACC can't really move. The SEC isn't looking to expand anymore. The Big Ten is pretty happy at 16 until they find out what Notre Dame wants to do. So I think it's all about, does the Pac-12 stay together? And if they don't, how many schools jump to the Big 12? But my guess is it'll remain kind of five major conferences for a little while.
Dan Wetzel, Yahoo Sports columnist here on the Rich Eisen Show. So let's then get to the college football playoff, because a couple of times you've mentioned, folks want to see how it shakes out, how that shakes out. Certainly Notre Dame being the most interested party on all of that. who's deciding it? What's the decision-making process on what it's going to be, and what's the time frame? And because I would imagine that will be the impetus to create more super leagues, super conferences, and things like that. Wouldn't you agree?
It could be or it could not be. It's what the structure. So they originally signed a 12-year deal on, this is the college football playoff, and it's 4 teams, and it's just the 4 best teams, 4 at-large bids, if you will. And that ends after the 2026 season. There is no rollover. So something new has to be created for after 2026, which is 4 seasons away. They had a plan, and right now they had a plan in place to go to 12 teams with 6 automatic bids. So all the top 6 conference champions every year would get a bid. So you'd have your SEC, Big Ten, ACC, Big 12, and Pac-12, plus your really good Boise State team or a big Mid-American Conference team or someone from the America, whatever it would be, they would also get an automatic bid. So it was a real lifeline to those smaller leagues. And then you'd still have 6 at-large spots, which helps the SEC get 2, 3, 4 teams in, Notre Dame get in, multiple teams. So that plan was there. But under the old rules, a single conference could say, we don't like that, and the deal would not get changed because they were trying to alter the current deal. So the ACC, Pac-12, and Big Ten blocked it, much to the disastrous decision by the ACC and the Pac-12, because right now they'd have automatic access to the playoff if they had taken that deal in January. Going forward, the new deal is just a new deal. The SEC and the Big Ten have the majority of the big-time schools. They can essentially create whatever playoff they want and say, this is how we're doing it. You're either in and you're out. Because you can't really have a playoff without the SEC and the Big Ten. So if they sit there and say, we want an 18 playoff with all at-large spots, even though we're going to get 6, 7 of those spots every year, Notre Dame might say, hey, we're in. Everyone else is basically going to have to go along with it, or they're going to have to try to create their own playoff. It'll kill their recruiting. So this is going forward. This decision is almost essentially whatever the SEC and Big Ten want, and that's not good for the Pac-12, the Big 12, or the ACC, let alone the Mountain West and all of that. So it's a precarious spot. The SEC is going to really drive this boat, but the Big Ten too. So it's a weird process because you're going to create a system for all of college football, but not all of college football is really going to have a say anymore.
Well, I mean, I think what ends up happening, Dan, you tell me, is that you've got 16 teams in the Big Ten right now, right? And the SEC's got this same number once Oklahoma.
16, yep.
Okay, so that's 16. And so you could just stop it right there in a way, normally, because...
You know what else has 16 teams? The AFC.
And the NFC.
And the NFC.
Correct. And then and those
they
two...
have their own playoff.
Right, they do. Yeah. And then they meet in what's called the Super Bowl. I think you've heard of it.
Yes,
but college,
somewhat popular event.
Yes, but college football has more
and profitable.
Yes, but college football has obviously more teams than just those 32 of interest, and not all those 32 are terrific, just like the NFL as well. So what I'm thinking is you create another situation where one 16-team conference exists and another 16-team conference exists. Everybody has their own playoffs, and you have a 4-team playoff situation based off of those 64. And some of those 64, you make a deal that can get relegated out, relegated in, things of that nature. And everybody's going to have to race for those 64 seats. And that's going to be a free-for-all. That's going to come based on maybe the accelerant is the name, image, and likeness deals that some of these teams can offer, or some conferences will close up their ranks to have their own NIL rules because they're not waiting around for anybody else, and some might be more of interest to others, and that's how players are going to get there, and that's how this is all going to go. I have no idea who's going to run it. Maybe it's Sankey. I don't know. But what do you think of that idea, Dan? What do you think?
So the reason that's not a bad idea, by the way, and that would be a good solution, but that would mean the SEC and Big Ten would be ceding equal power to everybody else, and right now they control. Plus, where does Notre Dame fit in on that? But it's certainly possible there are 3 or 4 conferences. anything is on the table at this point, and that's why getting rid of that playoff plan in January was such a terrible decision for everyone else in college football, because the SEC was driving it, and they were very magnanimous about saying, "Hey, you guys are in. The Big 12 is going to get in, even though they're not even close to as good as we are. The Pac-12 is going to get in, even if you lose UCLA and USC." And so right now you'd be sitting there in the Pac-12 and you're Oregon going, well, okay, this is terrible. We just lost USC. We're not going to make as much money. But you know what? All we got to do is beat these other schools, which we can beat, and we're in the playoff. We can do this, right? Kind of like the way Gonzaga can just win the Western, can recruit lottery picks every year because they have a path to the Final Four. It doesn't matter that they're in the West Coast Conference or they're a small Jesuit school. They have a path. When you get rid of that path, now you have to hope that under your plan, the SEC and Big Ten say, hey, we want to be partners with all the rest of you. They may not. They may sit there and say, we're going to go 20 each. You're in or you're out, and Notre Dame has to jump, and Clemson's got to find a way out of their thing or something like that. So it's just very, very unknown and very uncertain. And I don't think anyone in college athletics has the chess pieces designed out far enough to know exactly how it's going to be. But people will be left behind. Good programs with lots of fans are going to be left behind, and it's happened in the past with teams, and it's going to happen in the future. And if you really love all of college football, it's a fairly depressing time, even though we're going to end up with more good games and things like that. You don't really want to see let's say a Washington State just get left out in the cold. It's like they got fans and they're fun to watch sometimes, and you want that hope that they can be good. People are going to get left behind.
Dan Wetzel here on the Rich Eisen Show. Last one for you, sir. I'm going to go a little bit more deeper, arcane, and then a moment and that is a little bit, I guess, for me. How does the scheduling work in the Big Ten now? I mean, does that mean, like, does Michigan have to play UCLA, USC, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State every year with Wisconsin and Iowa thrown in? I mean, how is this going to work? Now that USC, UCLA is here, you got West Coast trips, right? I mean, like, that's going to be significant. Yeah. When do you make them? The USC gets to, let's just say, USC goes to both Ohio State and Michigan. Let's just throw that out there. But Ohio State, Michigan gets USC in September when it's real nice, but Ohio State gets them in November where, kids from Rancho Cucamonga, like, Ohio State's current quarterback, might have to put their hands in a fanny pack to keep them warm, That was a shot I just made at Ohio State. Yes. You want to
be the parka salesman to USC athletics.
Yeah,
Good business right
yes,
now, right?
Yes, there will now be winter clothing that USC might not need in previous years. But how does it work? What are you hearing?
Well, they will probably play 9 games. They'll have 3. So let's take your beloved Michigan.
Yes.
Right. You want to have your 3 rivalry games that you must play every year because you have to have Michigan play Ohio State, right?
You're going to have
to have Michigan play Michigan State.
Correct.
And maybe they play Minnesota because they got that little brown jug trophy or somebody else, whatever it is. And then you cycle through the rest of the teams, and you should be able to get to everybody home and away. So you would maybe play a USC every other year, and every 4 years you would either travel there or you would travel there. So you play home and away, but you could stack it up that way. So there's a way to kind of cycle it through where you get to play everybody fairly often, but you do not lose the big television draws and the hardcore rivalries that you need, such as, like, there's no way you're not having Michigan and Ohio State play every year because they get 10. That's the biggest game of the year. They get 10 million people to watch. So we're not expanding to lose 10 million person games. We're expanding to get more of them. But for UCLA and USC, extremely challenging. Lane Kiffin the other day was talking. I remember he coached USC.
Yep.
And he talked about when they would go play Notre Dame every other year. And it was a big deal of when do you leave because you got to get acclimated. And so they would leave on Thursdays for a Saturday game and get in early, and it's a grind. And they would always play that thing in the middle of the season. They would play at Notre Dame in mid-October when the game's in L.A. They do it at the end of the year. Now you're going to have to do that like week after week after week because, there's certainly 2 road games in a row, is not uncommon. So you might be USC or UCLA saying, hey, we're going to fly to Illinois, and we're going to come back, and then we're going to go play over at Rutgers the next week, and we got to go. So it's the travel for USC football and UCLA football is enormous. And same thing for, obviously, not just basketball, which people care about. Those are long road trips and all that, and you go and get time zones. But then how'd you like to be a baseball team or a softball team or the soccer team? You signed to play at UCLA. You think you're playing in warm weather, not like a winter game, a spring baseball game in East Lansing. You were signing up for something else. So for these non-revenue sports, it's even harder. They'll make it work for football, but it will be a challenge, as you see in the NFL. When you're going west to east, it's a challenge for that team in the West. Well, it's a perpetual challenge now for UCLA and USC competitively.
Dan, thanks for the time, man. Look for my call as the season approaches more. Thanks for the 2 cents. Greatly appreciate it.
Anytime, Rich. Talk to you soon.
Right back at you. Dan Wetzel, one of the best and finest right here on the Rich Eisen Show from Yahoo Sports.